I'm Sophia Williams, 28, lead database administrator at Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm where I've been the backbone of their IT operations for 3 years. This Christmas, while my entire family gathered for our traditional holiday celebration that I've missed every year since starting this job, my boss Linda demanded I stay behind to monitor the servers, while she and the senior staff jetted off to Aspen with their Christmas bonuses calculated from the overtime they've been stealing from me. What they didn't know was that I'd been documenting every labor violation, every stolen hour, every discriminatory comment for months. And when I saw that company credit card statement accidentally CC'd to my email showing their $50,000 ski trip funded by my unpaid overtime, I realized they'd just handed me the perfect Christmas gift. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Like, if you've ever been pushed too far by a toxic workplace, because what I did next changed everything. The story began 2 years ago when I was promoted to lead database administrator. I thought it was recognition of my hard work, but I quickly realized it was just Linda's way of dumping all the IT responsibilities on me while keeping the same salary. "You're so good with computers, Sophia," she'd say with that fake smile. "I'm sure you can handle this too." Henderson and Associates specialized in tax preparation and financial consulting for small businesses. We had about 40 employees, and I was the only IT person for the entire company. Every server crash, every password reset, every software update, it all fell on me. The original job offer letter sat in my desk drawer, a constant reminder of promises never kept. It clearly stated a salary increase to $85,000 upon promotion to lead administrator. 2 years later, I was still making my original $65,000, despite Linda's assurances that the increase was coming in the next budget cycle. "Budget's tight this year," she'd explain whenever I brought it up. "But you're doing such important work. We really depend on you." What made it worse was watching the senior partners receive their quarterly bonuses while I was told there wasn't money for my promised raise. Linda herself had gotten a new BMW last spring, paid for with company funds as a business vehicle. Meanwhile, I was driving my 10-year-old Honda with a check engine light that I couldn't afford to fix. The promotion came with a fancy new title but no additional compensation, benefits, or even acknowledgement of the massive increase in responsibility. I went from handling basic help desk tickets to managing the entire IT infrastructure for a 40-person company. Database administration, network security, server maintenance, software licensing, hardware procurement, it all became my problem.at. First, I was grateful for the opportunity. Fresh out of college with a computer science degree, I thought this was my chance to prove myself in the corporate world. I worked 60-hour weeks without complaint, stayed late to handle system updates, and came in on weekends to maintain servers. I told myself it was temporary, that once I established myself, things would get better, but Linda had other plans. Every successful project I completed became evidence that I could handle more. Every problem I solved quickly became proof that I didn't need additional help or resources. My competence became the justification for my exploitation. "Sophia's got it covered" became Linda's standard response to any IT-related issue. She'd wave off concerns from other employees about system problems or upgrade needs with complete confidence that I'd figure it out. And I always did, often working through nights and weekends to keep everything running smoothly. The breaking point should have come 6 months into the promotion when our main server crashed during tax season. I spent 36 hours straight rebuilding the system, surviving on vending machine coffee and determination. When I finally got everything back online, saving the company from potentially losing hundreds of thousands in revenue, Linda's response was, "Great job. I knew you'd handle it." No bonus. No time off to recover. No acknowledgement of what I'd sacrificed. Just an expectation that this level of dedication was normal. Looking back now, I can see how carefully Linda manipulated the situation. She praised my technical skills while undermining my confidence in other areas. She made me feel indispensable while simultaneously making me feel replaceable. Classic abuser tactics, but I was too young and eager to recognize them at the time. The IT ticket system became my digital prison. Every morning, I'd log in to find dozens of new requests. Printer won't work, email is slow, need admin access to install software, computer won't turn on. Each ticket represented hours of my day, but Linda treated them like minor inconveniences that I should handle between my real work.my real work, according to Linda, included managing 3 database servers, maintaining the network infrastructure for 2 office locations, handling all cybersecurity measures, managing software licenses for 40 employees, procuring and maintaining all hardware, providing technical support for our custom accounting software, and ensuring 99.9% uptime for all systems, the ticket logs painted a brutal picture. In an average week, I handled 80+ support requests, performed routine maintenance on 15 servers, managed software updates across 40 workstations, and troubleshot network issues that affected productivity. The system automatically tracked my response times, which Linda used to pressure me for faster resolution. "Sophia, I see ticket number 1247 took you 3 hours to resolve. Can we get that down to 2 hours next time?" She'd ask during our weekly meetings, completely ignoring that I'd diagnosed and fixed a complex network routing issue that saved the company thousands in potential downtime. My phone became an extension of my anxiety. Emergency calls came at all hours, servers crashing at 2 a.m., critical software failures on Sundays, network outages during peak business hours. I was expected to be available 24/7, 365 days a year. Other employees got to disconnect when they left the office. I lived in constant fear of the next crisis. The weekend work was especially brutal. While everyone else enjoyed their time off, I'd spend Saturdays performing system maintenance that couldn't be done during business hours. Software updates, hardware replacements, security patches, database optimization, all of it happened on my personal time without any additional compensation. Linda's favorite phrase was mission critical. Everything became mission critical when it was convenient for her. A partner's email being slow was mission critical. The coffee machine in the break room losing its network connection was mission critical. Her personal laptop running slowly was mission critical, but when I requested additional IT staff or better equipment, suddenly the budget constraints became mission critical too. "We're a small company, Sophia. We can't afford redundancy like the big firms. That's why we need someone versatile like you." The senior staff treated me like their personal tech support. David Morrison, one of the partners, would call me directly whenever he had computer issues, bypassing the ticket system entirely. "Sophia, my PowerPoint isn't working right. Can you come fix it now?" Never mind that I was in the middle of migrating our email server to prevent a security vulnerability. Margaret Chen, another partner, was even worse. She'd demand that I drop everything to help her with basic tasks like formatting documents or setting up video calls. "I'm meeting with a major client in 10 minutes. You need to make this work now." The urgency was always manufactured, the problems always simple, but the interruption to my actual work was devastating. The most frustrating part was the complete lack of understanding about what I actually did. To them, I was just the computer person. They had no concept of the complexity involved in maintaining their entire digital infrastructure. When everything worked perfectly, I was invisible. When something went wrong, I was solely to blame. The first time I noticed the discrepancy was in March, during my annual review preparation. I'd been tracking my hours meticulously in a personal spreadsheet, noting start times, end times, weekend work, and emergency calls. When I compared my records to the company's official timesheet system, the numbers didn't match. According to my documentation, I'd worked 847 hours of overtime in the previous year. According to the company system, I'd worked 312 hours. The difference represented over $20,000 in stolen wages. I brought the discrepancy to Linda's attention during our review meeting, presenting both sets of documentation. She barely glanced at my spreadsheet before dismissing it entirely. "Sophia, you're a salaried employee. Overtime doesn't really apply to your position," she said, her tone suggesting I was being unreasonable for even bringing it up. "But I researched the labor laws," I replied, pulling out printed pages from the Department of Labor website. "Computer professionals are only exempt from overtime if they make at least $27.63 per hour in base salary. At $65,000 annually, I'm making $31.25 per hour, but that's only if I work exactly 40 hours per week. With the overtime I'm actually working, my effective hourly rate drops below the exemption threshold." Linda's expression hardened. "I think you're misunderstanding the law. Let me have HR look into this." The HR investigation was a joke. Patricia from Human Resources, who was actually Linda's college roommate and had no formal HR training, spent 5 minutes reviewing my complaint before concluding that I was misinterpreting the regulations. The company consulted with our legal team. Patricia informed me in a condescending tone, and they confirmed that your position is exempt from overtime compensation. You should focus on being grateful for the opportunity to gain experience rather than trying to nickel and dime the company. But I wasn't backing down. I continued documenting everything, creating a detailed comparison between my actual hours and the company's reported hours. The pattern was clear. They were systematically reducing my recorded time to avoid paying overtime. Late nights working until 2 a.m. became left early on the official timesheet. Weekend emergency calls that lasted 4 hours were recorded as brief check-in. Extended projects that required 16-hour days were logged as standard 8-hour shifts. The most egregious example was the server migration project in August. I worked for 72 consecutive hours, sleeping on the office couch between critical phases of the migration. The project was essential to prevent data loss and maintain business continuity. My personal record showed 32 hours of overtime for that week alone. The company timesheet showed 0 overtime, with a note that I'd worked flexible hours. I started taking screenshots of the time tracking system, creating a digital paper trail that couldn't be altered after the fact. Every login, every timestamp, every modification to my recorded hours, I documented it all. The theft wasn't just about money, though the financial impact was devastating. It was about respect, acknowledgement, and basic human decency. They were literally stealing my life, taking my personal time and family relationships, then refusing to compensate me for it. During this investigation, I discovered that other employees were experiencing similar issues, though not to the same extent. Jake in accounting mentioned that his overtime hours seemed lighter than expected on his pay stubs. Sarah in client services complained that her weekend work wasn't being properly recorded, but none of them were willing to rock the boat. They were too afraid of losing their jobs, too convinced that this was normal in the corporate world. I was the only one naive enough to believe that laws actually mattered, that documentation would lead to justice. The breaking point came when I calculated the total amount stolen over my 3 years of employment. Including the promised salary increase that never materialized, the company owed me over $85,000 in back wages and overtime compensation. That was more than my entire annual salary. The company-wide email arrived on December 15th, with the subject line, holiday schedule, final approval. I opened it expecting the usual corporate pleasantries about work-life balance and family time. Instead, I found a carefully orchestrated plan that excluded me from the very concept of having a life outside work. Every senior staff member had requested and received approval for vacation time from December 22nd through January 2nd. Linda would be in Aspen with her family. David Morrison was taking his wife to Hawaii. Margaret Chen had planned a European cruise. Even Patricia from HR was approved for a week in Miami, but at the bottom of the email, in a separate section labeled Essential Coverage, my name appeared alone: Sophia Williams, IT Support and Server Monitoring, required on-site December 24 to 26 and December 31st to January 1st. The justification was laughable. Due to the critical nature of our IT infrastructure and the increased vulnerability during holiday periods, we require dedicated technical coverage to ensure business continuity. This was the 4th consecutive year I'd been denied Christmas time off. Each year, Linda had a different excuse. Year 1, you're too new to take major holidays off. Year 2, we're implementing new systems and need your expertise. Year 3, budget constraints mean we can't afford temporary IT coverage. Now, Year 4, essential personnel must maintain operations. What made it worse was the complete hypocrisy. If the servers were so critical that they required 24/7 monitoring during the holidays, why wasn't that a concern during the rest of the year? Why could Linda leave for 2-week vacations in July without requiring me to sleep in the office? The truth was obvious. They wanted to ensure that if anything went wrong while they were living it up on their expensive vacations, someone would be there to fix it immediately. I was their insurance policy, their safety net, their digital janitor. I thought about my family's Christmas traditions, the ones I'd been missing for 3 years running. My mom's homemade cookies that she only made once a year. My dad's terrible Christmas morning pancakes that somehow tasted perfect anyway. My sister's kids opening presents, growing up without really knowing their aunt because she was always at work. Last year, I'd tried to compromise by asking for just Christmas Day off, promising to work Christmas Eve and the day after. Linda had refused, claiming that servers were most likely to fail on major holidays due to reduced monitoring and increased vulnerability. When I'd suggested that we implement proper monitoring systems that could alert us to issues without requiring physical presence, she'd shot that down too. We're not a tech company, Sophia. We can't afford those kinds of luxury solutions. But they could afford luxury ski trips to Aspen. Apparently. I picked up the phone to call Linda, hoping to have a rational conversation about the schedule. Maybe I could work Christmas Eve and the day after, but have Christmas Day with my family. Maybe we could implement a rotation system for future holidays. Maybe there was some compromise that would acknowledge my humanity. Linda, I got the holiday schedule email. I was hoping we could discuss the Christmas coverage requirements. What's to discuss? The schedule is final. We've already confirmed our travel arrangements. I understand that, but I've worked Christmas for 3 years straight. I was hoping to spend at least Christmas Day with my family this year. Sophia, you know how important system reliability is during the holidays. What if a server crashes? While we're all gone? What if there's a security breach? We can't risk the company's future just so you can have a day off. But Linda, we have monitoring systems. If something critical happens, I can respond remotely. I don't need to physically sit in the office for 3 days straight. I'm not comfortable with remote monitoring for something this important. I need you on-site where you can respond immediately to any issues. What about hiring temporary coverage? Or cross-training someone else to handle basic monitoring? The budget doesn't allow for temporary IT staff, and our other employees don't have the technical expertise to handle server issues. Look, I know this is a sacrifice, but that's what being essential personnel means. We're depending on you. The conversation ended with Linda's standard manipulation tactic, making my exploitation sound like recognition. I wasn't being punished. I was being trusted with critical responsibilities. I should be grateful for the opportunity to prove my value to the company, but I was done being grateful for abuse. The email that changed everything arrived on December 20th at 3:47 p.m. It was supposed to go to Linda's personal assistant, but someone had made a mistake with the CC field. Instead of being hidden from my view, the complete itinerary for the senior staff's Aspen vacation landed directly in my inbox. At first, I thought it was spam. The subject line read, Aspen Holiday Retreat, Final Arrangements and Expense Summary. But when I opened it, I found detailed travel plans, accommodation bookings, and a comprehensive expense breakdown that made my stomach turn. The Ritz-Carlton Bachelor Gulch, $8,500 per night for the presidential suite, booked for 7 nights. Total, $59,500. Private jet charter from our regional airport to Aspen, $18,000 each way. Total, $36,000. Ski lift tickets, equipment rentals, and lessons, $12,000. Fine dining reservations and entertainment, $15,000. Spa treatments and luxury services, $8,000. The grand total for their company retreat was $130,500. But what made my blood boil was the payment method listed at the bottom: Henderson and Associates corporate account, business development expense. This wasn't their personal vacation money. This was company funds. Money that supposedly wasn't available for my promised salary increase, for additional IT staff, for proper equipment upgrades, or for fair overtime compensation. Money that Linda claimed was too tight to justify basic operational expenses. I cross-referenced the expense amount with my calculations of stolen overtime wages. My unpaid hours over 3 years totaled approximately $85,000. Their single vacation cost more than everything they owed me, and they were funding it with corporate money that could have paid for multiple IT staff positions. The detailed itinerary read like a mockery of my Christmas sacrifice. While I would be sitting alone in a fluorescent-lit office, monitoring servers that hadn't failed during a holiday in the 5 years I'd been tracking, they would be enjoying champagne breakfasts, private ski instruction, and couples massages. December 24th, morning, private ski lesson with Olympic instructor. Afternoon, couple spa treatments. Evening, 7-course tasting menu at Element 47. December 25th, Christmas Day brunch at the Ritz-Carlton. Afternoon, private shopping excursion in downtown Aspen. Evening, VIP access to exclusive Christmas concert. December 26th, helicopter tour of the Rockies. Afternoon, wine tasting at Luxury Mountain Lodge. Evening, private chef dinner experience. The expenses continued for each day, detailing activities that cost more per hour than I made in a week. Meanwhile, my Christmas Day would consist of microwaved frozen dinner and watching security camera feeds of empty hallways, but the most infuriating part was the business justification. According to the expense report, this was a strategic planning retreat and team-building investment. The same leadership team that claimed we couldn't afford proper IT infrastructure was writing off a luxury vacation as a business necessity. I started calculating numbers that made my hands shake with rage. The cost of their private jet could have funded my salary increase for 6 years. The presidential suite booking could have hired 2 additional IT staff members. The spa treatments alone would have covered the server monitoring software I'd been requesting for 2 years. I printed everything. Email headers, expense details, itinerary specifics, payment confirmations. This wasn't just evidence of financial mismanagement, it was proof of the systematic prioritization of executive luxury over employee welfare. The timing was perfect in its cruelty. They would be toasting champagne while I ate vending machine sandwiches. They would be getting massages while I troubleshot printer problems for the skeleton crew of junior staff who couldn't afford their own vacations. They would be enjoying heated pools while I shivered in an office where they refused to pay for adequate heating during off hours. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the expense report, feeling something shift inside me. For 3 years, I'd convinced myself that my situation was temporary, that hard work would eventually be rewarded, that loyalty would be recognized. But seeing their vacation expenses laid out in cold numbers destroyed that illusion completely. They had the money. They'd always had the money. Every excuse, every budget constraint, every financial justification for my exploitation had been a lie. They simply chose to spend company resources on themselves rather than treating their employees fairly. The encrypted USB drive sat in my desk drawer like a digital time bomb, containing 3 years of meticulously documented evidence that would destroy Henderson and Associates if it ever saw the light of day. What started as simple record keeping for my own protection had evolved into a comprehensive case file that would make any employment attorney salivate. The documentation process had begun innocently enough. After my first year of overtime discrepancies, I'd started keeping personal records of my work hours. But as the exploitation became more systematic and blatant, my record keeping became more sophisticated. Screenshots filled folders organized by date and incident type. Every email exchange with Linda about denied requests, every dismissive response to my concerns about working conditions, every promise of future improvements that never materialized. I had captured it all, complete with timestamps and metadata. The discriminatory comments section was particularly damning. Linda's casual sexism was so ingrained that she didn't even realize she was creating evidence. Comments like, "You're so detail-oriented, just like women are supposed to be," and "We don't need to worry about Sophia leaving for maternity leave anytime soon," were preserved in their original context. Audio recordings took up the largest portion of the drive. Living in a one-party consent state meant I could legally record conversations without informing the other party. 3 years of performance reviews, disciplinary meetings, and casual workplace interactions had been captured with crystalline clarity. Linda's voice, preserved forever. "Listen, Sophia, I know you think you deserve more money, but let's be realistic about your market value. You're not exactly Google material. This company took a chance on someone with your limited experience." David Morrison, discussing my workload, "Just pile more stuff on Sophia. She never complains and always gets it done. Why hire additional IT staff when we have someone willing to work for half the price?" Margaret Chen, during a partner meeting. "I was troubleshooting. The IT girl is so quiet and accommodating. Not like those aggressive tech bros you usually have to deal with. Much easier to manage." The financial documentation was equally comprehensive. Spreadsheets comparing my actual hours to reported hours, calculating wage theft down to the minute. Bank records showing my personal expenses while working unpaid overtime. Screenshots of the company's public financial filings, revealing executive compensation that dwarfed their claims of budget constraints. Most damaging were the internal communications I'd preserved during system maintenance. As the database administrator, I had legitimate access to email servers and backup systems. While performing routine maintenance, I discovered email threads between partners discussing how to minimize labor costs and maximize profit margins. Linda to David, "Sophia's performance review is coming up. We need to keep her salary expectations low while acknowledging her contributions. I'm thinking of emphasizing her growth opportunities rather than actual compensation." David to Margaret, "The IT infrastructure costs are eating into partner distributions. Can we restructure Sophia's position to make her officially part-time? We'd save on benefits while maintaining the same coverage." Margaret to Linda, "Legal reviewed the overtime exemption status. Technically, Sophia qualifies for overtime pay based on her actual wages and hours worked. We need to be careful about how we document her time." Beyond the smoking gun communications, I had preserved evidence of safety violations, security breaches, and regulatory noncompliance that the partners had covered up rather than address properly. Client data exposure incidents that were never reported to authorities. Financial record discrepancies that bordered on fraud. Software licensing violations that could result in massive fines. The legal consultation folder contained correspondence with 3 different employment attorneys, each confirming that I had grounds for multiple lawsuits. Wage theft, workplace discrimination, hostile work environment, retaliation, and breach of contract were all viable claims supported by my documentation. One attorney had been particularly blunt in his assessment: "I've seen a lot of employment cases, but the level of documentation you've assembled is extraordinary. Any one of these issues would be worth pursuing. Together, they represent a pattern of systemic abuse that would result in significant damages." The USB drive also contained my research into the company's financial status, insurance policies, and potential bankruptcy protections. I'd learned from other employment cases that winning a lawsuit meant nothing if the company could simply declare bankruptcy and walk away. But Henderson and Associates had assets, insurance coverage, and revenue streams that would survive legal action. Everything was encrypted with military-grade protocols and backed up in 3 separate secure cloud storage accounts. The evidence was distributed across multiple jurisdictions and protected by attorney-client privilege through my legal consultations. As I reviewed the contents that December evening, I realized I was holding more than just evidence of workplace abuse. This was documentation of a systematic business model built on exploiting employees, manipulating financial records, and prioritizing executive enrichment over legal compliance. The irony wasn't lost on me. My technical expertise, the same skills they exploited and undervalued, had enabled me to build an unassailable case against them. Every database query, every backup procedure, every security protocol I'd implemented in service of their company had also served to document their crimes. The question was no longer whether I had enough evidence to destroy them. The question was whether I had the courage to use it. Henderson and Associates' entire digital existence flowed through systems I had designed, implemented, and maintained single-handedly. Over 3 years, I had built a complex network architecture that made me not just the administrator, but the architect of their technological reality. Every byte of data, every database query, every backup process existed because I had created it. The system architecture diagram on my wall told the story of complete technological dependence. 3 primary database servers housed everything that mattered to the company: client financial records dating back 15 years, tax documents for over 2,000 active clients, internal financial data including partner compensation and profit distributions, employee records and payroll information, and proprietary business processes that gave them competitive advantages. Server 1 contained the client management system, a custom-built database that tracked every interaction, document, and financial detail for their clientele. This wasn't off-the-shelf software. I had designed and programmed the entire system to meet their specific needs. Every table, every relationship, every stored procedure existed because I had created it from scratch. Server 2 housed the financial management system, integrating with multiple third-party applications to provide real-time reporting and analysis. The data warehouse I'd built aggregated information from banking systems, investment platforms, and tax software to create comprehensive financial portraits for their wealthiest clients. Server 3 contained internal operations, employee records, partner financial data, business development information, and strategic planning documents. This server also housed the backup coordination system that managed data redundancy across all platforms. The beauty of my architecture was its integration. Data flowed seamlessly between systems, creating automated workflows that had dramatically improved the company's efficiency. Client information entered once could populate tax forms, investment reports, and billing systems automatically. Financial transactions triggered alerts, backups, and compliance reporting without human intervention. But the elegant integration had a dark side: complete dependency. I was the only person who understood how the systems connected. The documentation existed, but it was technical enough that no generalist could implement changes or repairs without months of training. I had deliberately designed certain critical components to be opaque to casual observation. My administrative access was comprehensive and unlimited. I controlled user permissions, data access rights, and system configurations. When Linda had asked me to implement proper security measures, I had created multiple layers of authentication and authorization that ultimately reported to my master administrator account. The backup systems were particularly sophisticated. I had implemented a 3-tier backup strategy: local daily backups, weekly offsite storage, and quarterly disaster recovery testing. But every backup system required authentication keys that only I possessed. The physical backup drives were encrypted with passwords only I knew. The cloud storage accounts used my personal credentials with company payment authorization. Network security was another area of complete control. I managed the firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and access controls that protected their data from external threats. Every security certificate, every VPN configuration, every encryption key was administered through my accounts with my authorization. Software licensing presented yet another dependency. I maintained relationships with dozens of vendors, managed license renewals, and coordinated software updates across the entire organization. Most vendor accounts were registered under my name with company contact information, making me the primary technical contact for everything from Microsoft Office to specialized tax preparation software. The custom applications I developed were perhaps the most critical dependency. Over 3 years, I had programmed dozens of specialized tools that automated routine tasks, generated custom reports, and integrated disparate systems. These applications existed nowhere else. They weren't commercial products that could be replaced or recreated easily. During my system review that December evening, I realized the scope of my technological control was absolute. I could access any file, modify any database, change any configuration, or disable any system within the network. More importantly, I could do all of this remotely, using administrative backdoors I'd implemented for emergency access. The disaster recovery documentation, required by their business insurance, listed me as the sole technical contact for system restoration. In the event of catastrophic failure, I was the only person authorized and capable of rebuilding their digital infrastructure. The insurance company had my personal contact information and expected me to be available for emergency response. What struck me most was how completely they had trusted me with their digital lives while simultaneously exploiting my professional contributions. They had given me the keys to their kingdom while refusing to pay me fairly for protecting it. Every system they depended on, every process that generated their profits, every security measure that protected their reputation existed because of my expertise and dedication. The irony was profound. In their efforts to save money by exploiting a single IT professional, they had created a single point of failure that could destroy their entire business. They had built their success on my skills while systematically undermining my motivation to protect them. Looking at the network diagram, I realized I wasn't just the database administrator. I was the digital god of Henderson and Associates, with the power to create or destroy their technological existence with a few keystrokes. And they had never bothered to consider what might happen if their god decided to stop being benevolent. Christmas morning arrived gray and silent. The office building empty except for the security guard who nodded sympathetically as I badged in at 7 a.m. The hallways echoed with my footsteps, fluorescent lights humming their monotonous tune over carpeted corridors that smelled of industrial cleaning supplies and abandonment. My desk waited exactly as I'd left it Friday evening, the dual monitors displaying screensavers of tropical beaches, a cruel joke considering where I'd rather be. While families across the country gathered around Christmas trees, sharing laughter and creating memories, I was settling into another day of digital servitude. The first few hours passed in routine maintenance. Server health checks, backup verification, security log reviews. Everything was running perfectly, as it had every Christmas for the past 3 years. The critical monitoring that supposedly required my physical presence could have been handled remotely in 15 minutes. At 10:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with text messages from my family. My niece Emma, now 6 years old, had sent a voice message through my sister's phone. "Aunt Sophie, where are you? We saved you presents but Mommy says you're working again." The guilt hit like a physical blow. 3 years of Christmas mornings. Emma had asked about her missing aunt. 3 years of my parents making excuses for my absence. 3 years of watching my family's disappointment fade into resigned acceptance that work would always come first in my life. I tried to focus on work, but social media became a torture device. LinkedIn was full of colleagues posting family photos, vacation updates, and holiday gratitude posts. Instagram showed friends from college enjoying Christmas brunches, exchanging gifts, and creating the memories I was trading for a company that saw me as disposable equipment. At 11:15 a.m., my final paycheck notification arrived via email. Even on Christmas Day, the automated payroll system continued the systematic theft. According to my records, I'd worked 47 hours of overtime in the previous 2 weeks preparing for their vacation and handling year-end system updates. According to my paycheck, I'd worked exactly 0 overtime hours. The calculation was simple: $47.50 per hour overtime rate times 47 hours equals $2,232.50 in stolen wages, just from the past 2 weeks. They had literally stolen Christmas money from me while funding their luxury vacation with company resources. That's when Linda's Instagram post appeared in my feed. A perfectly curated image of her family's Christmas morning in their $8,500 per night presidential suite. Designer pajamas, expensive gifts scattered around a professionally decorated tree, champagne flutes catching the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking snow-covered peaks. The caption read, "Grateful for another successful year and the amazing team that makes our growth possible. Sometimes you have to invest in strategic planning and team building. #blessed, #leadership, #work-life balance." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. She was posting about work-life balance while forcing me to work Christmas Day. She was celebrating the amazing team while I sat alone in an empty office. She was grateful for our growth while systematically stealing my wages to fund her luxury lifestyle. But the breaking point came with David Morrison's post 20 minutes later. A video of him and his wife clinking champagne glasses on their private jet, with the caption, "Christmas Day mimosas at 40,000 feet. Hard work pays off when you build a sustainable business model." Hashtag entrepreneur life, hashtag success, hashtag grateful, sustainable business model. Built on exploiting employees and stealing wages. Success measured by their ability to extract maximum value from my labor while providing minimum compensation. Hard work paying off, for them, using my efforts. I sat in that empty office, surrounded by the humming servers I'd built and maintained, staring at photos of people celebrating Christmas with money they'd stolen from me, and felt something fundamental break inside my chest. Not my heart, that had been breaking slowly for 3 years. This was deeper. This was the part of me that believed in fairness, justice, and the basic human decency that supposedly governed workplace relationships. The internal dialogue I'd been having for months suddenly crystallized into perfect clarity. These people didn't see me as human. I was a resource to be exploited, a tool to be used until it broke, a machine that generated profit for their personal enrichment. My expertise, my dedication, my sacrifices, none of it mattered except as inputs for their wealth extraction. I pulled up the network administration console, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. 3 years of documentation sat on my encrypted drive, proving systematic wage theft, discrimination, and financial misconduct. 3 years of legal consultations had confirmed I could destroy them through proper channels if I was patient enough to endure months or years of litigation, but sitting in that fluorescent-lit prison on Christmas morning, watching them celebrate with my stolen money, patience felt like complicity. Legal channels felt like another system designed to protect people like Linda while grinding down people like me. The database architecture diagram stared back at me from the wall, every connection and dependency representing my complete power over their digital existence. I wasn't just the administrator of their systems, I was the creator, the maintainer, and potentially the destroyer of everything they'd built on my exploitation. My phone buzzed again. Another voice message from Emma. Aunt Sophie, Daddy's making pancakes but they're not very good. We miss you. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. The database console glowed expectantly, waiting for commands that would reshape the digital landscape of Henderson and Associates forever. My hands moved with surgical precision across the keyboard, executing a carefully planned sequence that I'd rehearsed mentally for weeks but never intended to implement. First, I disabled all automated backup processes. The nightly backups that had been my pride and joy, ensuring business continuity and data protection, ceased their faithful operations with a few keystrokes. The backup logs showed normal completion, but no new data would be preserved going forward. Next, I accessed the disaster recovery systems I'd built to protect them from exactly what I was about to do. The off-site backup servers, the cloud storage redundancies, the emergency restoration protocols, all of it went dark. Every safety net I'd carefully constructed over 3 years disappeared into digital oblivion. The beauty of my approach was its methodical nature. This wasn't a rage-fueled destruction, it was a systematic dismantling conducted with the same professional competence they'd exploited for years. Each deletion was logged, each action was deliberate, each step moved me closer to digital justice. Server 1 housed the client management database, containing 15 years of financial records, tax documents, and business relationships. The custom software I'd built to manage these relationships had taken 18 months to develop and debug. It was irreplaceable, containing business logic specific to their operations that existed nowhere else. I began with the indices, the digital shortcuts that made database queries fast and efficient. Without indices, even simple searches would become impossibly slow, rendering the system unusable even if the core data remained intact. Then I moved to the stored procedures, the automated processes that handled complex calculations and data transformations. Server 2 contained the financial management system, the integrated platform that aggregated data from dozens of sources to create comprehensive reporting. This system had taken 2 years to perfect, requiring custom API integrations with banking platforms, investment services, and regulatory reporting systems. The deletion process here was more complex, as I needed to ensure that dependency relationships were severed properly to prevent any possibility of automated recovery. Each table, each relationship, each calculated field disappeared in sequence, like watching a digital house of cards collapse in slow motion. Server 3 held internal operations data, payroll records, partner compensation details, strategic planning documents, and the very expense reports that had revealed their Aspen vacation. This server also contained the security systems, user authentication databases, and access control lists that protected their entire network. As I worked, I monitored the network traffic and system performance indicators. Everything appeared normal from the outside. The web servers continued responding to requests, the email system functioned properly, and the basic network infrastructure remained stable. Anyone conducting superficial monitoring would see nothing unusual. The encrypted evidence drive remained connected to my workstation, automatically logging every action I took. The irony was delicious. I was documenting the destruction of their data with the same meticulous attention to detail I'd used to document their crimes against me hour by hour. The databases emptied. Client records accumulated over decades vanished into digital void. Financial models that had taken months to develop ceased to exist. Custom reports that partners relied on for strategic decisions became empty shells, functional in structure, but devoid of content. The most satisfying deletions involved the executive compensation records, the very files that showed how my stolen wages had funded their luxury lifestyles. Partner distribution schedules, bonus calculations, expense account records, all of it disappeared as cleanly as if it had never existed. By 3 p.m., the primary databases were hollow shells, maintaining their structural integrity while containing no actual data. Anyone attempting to access client information would find empty tables. Financial reports would generate successfully but display no results. The custom applications I'd built would function perfectly while managing absolutely nothing. The final step was the most technically challenging, covering my digital tracks while maintaining plausible deniability. I couldn't simply delete everything and walk away, that would obviously implicate me. Instead, I implemented cascading failures that would appear to be system malfunctions rather than deliberate sabotage. I introduced subtle corruptions in the database transaction logs, creating the appearance of hardware failures that had gradually degraded data integrity. I modified the error reporting systems to generate false alerts suggesting memory errors and disk corruption. I scheduled delayed failures and backup verification processes that would surface days after my departure. The beautiful complexity of the system I'd built now worked against them. Because I was the only person who truly understood the architecture, my sabotage could be hidden within layers of technical complexity that would confuse any outside investigators. As I completed the final deletions, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sadness. 3 years of my professional life had gone into building these systems. My expertise, my creativity, my dedication, all of it had been poured into infrastructure that had generated millions in revenue for people who saw me as exploitable labor. But as I watched the last database tables empty, I realized I wasn't destroying my work. I was reclaiming it. Every system I'd built had been tainted by their exploitation. Every elegant solution I'd crafted had been used to extract profit while denying me fair compensation. At 4:47 p.m. on Christmas Day, the digital purge was complete. Henderson and Associates still had functional computers, working networks, and operational software. But they had no data, no client records, no financial history, and no way to recover any of it without my cooperation. The servers hummed contentedly, processing empty queries and managing non-existent data with perfect efficiency. The resignation letter took me 20 minutes to craft, each word carefully chosen to maintain plausible deniability while hinting at the storm they were about to face. I printed it on company letterhead, a final irony that their own resources would deliver the news of my departure. Dear Linda and Henderson and Associates leadership team, after careful consideration, I have decided to resign from my position as lead database administrator, effective immediately. This decision comes after extensive reflection on my career goals and professional priorities. During my 3 years with Henderson and Associates, I have dedicated myself to building and maintaining the technological infrastructure that supports your business operations. I am proud of the systems I've implemented and the reliability standards I've maintained throughout my tenure. However, recent developments have made it clear that my professional values and career aspirations are no longer aligned with the company's direction. I believe it is in everyone's best interest for me to pursue opportunities that better match my expectations for professional growth and fair compensation. I will be transitioning my responsibilities immediately and will not be available for consultation or emergency support after today. I trust that the robust systems and documentation I've provided will ensure business continuity during this transition. Please forward my final paycheck and any relevant employment documentation to my home address. I wish you success in your future endeavors. Sincerely, Sophia Williams. The letter was professional, cordial, and completely devastating in its implications. Anyone reading it would understand that I was immediately unavailable, that I had concerns about compensation, and that I considered the system's documentation sufficient for transition. What they wouldn't realize until later was that the robust systems contained no data and the documentation assumed expertise they didn't possess. I placed the letter in the center of Linda's desk, weighted down with her favorite crystal paperweight, a gift from grateful clients who had no idea their data had just vanished. The positioning was deliberate. She would see it immediately upon returning from Aspen, but not before I was long gone. My personal belongings fit into a single cardboard box, a few photos, my coffee mug, the small succulent plant that had somehow Survived 3 years in fluorescent lighting, and my backup of the encrypted evidence drive. Everything else belonged to the company or represented memories I preferred to leave behind. The IT equipment presented a more complex challenge. My personal laptop had been used occasionally for work purposes, containing cached passwords and system access credentials. I performed a complete secure wipe, overwriting the drive multiple times to ensure no recoverable data remained. The same treatment went to my personal phone, removing any work-related applications or contacts. I disabled my employee access card, locked my desk drawers, and changed the passwords on my personal email accounts to prevent any potential unauthorized access attempts. The final step was logging out of all company systems, using my administrator privileges one last time to remove my user accounts from active directories. The walk through the empty building felt like a funeral procession for my professional innocence. Each department I passed represented relationships that had been poisoned by exploitation, colleagues who had unknowingly benefited from my underpaid labor, and managers who had prioritized profit over basic human decency. The server room deserved a final visit. These machines had been my digital children, carefully tended and lovingly maintained through countless late nights and weekend emergencies. They hummed with quiet efficiency, processing queries and managing workflows exactly as I'd programmed them to do. The only difference was that they were now managing nothing at all. I thought about the hundreds of hours I'd spent in this room, troubleshooting hardware failures, implementing software updates, and building the digital backbone that supported their entire business model. Every cable was routed exactly as I designed. Every configuration was optimized according to my specifications. Every security protocol reflected my understanding of their operational needs, but for all my technical expertise and professional dedication, they had seen only an exploitable resource. My knowledge was valuable enough to make me indispensable, but not valuable enough to compensate fairly. My skills were critical enough to demand 24/7 availability, but not critical enough to justify basic workplace respect. The security guard waved goodbye as I badged out for the final time. The magnetic reader recording 5:23 p.m. as my last official action as an employee of Henderson and Associates. The parking lot was empty except for my aging Honda, its check engine light glowing like a beacon of financial strain that my stolen wages could have easily remedied. As I drove away from the building, I felt an unexpected sense of liberation. For the first time in 3 years, my phone wouldn't ring with emergency calls. No servers would crash demanding immediate attention. No partners would interrupt my personal time with manufactured urgencies. No Linda would manipulate my dedication into unpaid overtime. The evening traffic was light, most people already settled into their Christmas celebrations. I drove past houses decorated with lights and families visible through windows, sharing meals and opening presents. For the first time in years, I was free to join my own family celebration, even if it meant arriving a day late. My phone remained blissfully silent in the passenger seat, no longer the digital leash that had bound me to their operational demands. The absence of notification sounds felt like emerging from underwater, finally able to breathe without the constant pressure of their expectations. The decision was irreversible now. Whatever consequences would follow, whatever legal battles might emerge, whatever professional reputation damage might occur, it was all beyond the point of return. I had burned the bridge, salted the earth, and walked away from the smoldering ruins of my exploitation, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt genuinely happy. Linda's scream echoed through the empty Henderson and Associates building at 8:47 a.m. on December 27th, piercing the post-holiday silence like a digital alarm clock announcing the end of their comfortable world. I wasn't there to witness it, but the frantic email chain that followed painted a vivid picture of panic, confusion, and dawning horror. The first email arrived in my personal inbox at 9:15 a.m., marked with the red exclamation point of high priority, urgent, system issues, please call immediately. Sophia, we're experiencing some database connectivity issues this morning. Can you please call the office as soon as possible? Several client files appear to be inaccessible. Linda. The tone was professional, almost casual. She clearly expected this to be a routine technical glitch that I would resolve with my usual efficiency. The assumption that I would drop everything to fix their problems, even after resigning, revealed how completely they had taken my availability for granted. 15 minutes later, the second email arrived with noticeably more urgency. Sophia. Emergency, all client databases appear to be empty. Please respond immediately. This is critical. Linda. By 10 a.m., the email tone had shifted to desperation. Sophia, I don't know what's happening, but we need you here right now. David is flying back from Hawaii early. Margaret is cutting her cruise short. This is a company emergency. Please call me as soon as you get this. Linda. I could imagine the scene unfolding in the office, Linda frantically clicking through database applications, watching query after query return empty results. The client management system that had contained 15 years of financial data now displayed blank tables and zero records. The financial reporting dashboard showed perfectly formatted reports with no actual information. The beauty of my deletion method was becoming apparent. Everything looked functional on the surface. The applications loaded properly, the user interfaces displayed correctly, and the system performance indicators showed normal operation. But beneath the polished exterior, there was absolutely nothing. At 10:30 a.m., David Morrison joined the email chain from his Hawaiian resort. What the hell is going on? I'm trying to access the Henderson account files and everything is empty. Sophia, call me immediately. We have client meetings on Monday that depend on this data. Margaret Chen's email arrived 20 minutes later from her cruise ship's internet connection. Emergency conference call in 1 hour. Sophia, I don't care what your resignation letter said, you need to fix this immediately. This is bigger than whatever petty grievances you might have. The petty grievances comment was particularly revealing. Even in the face of catastrophic data loss, she couldn't acknowledge that wage theft and systematic exploitation might be legitimate concerns. To her, my resignation was simply an inconvenience that shouldn't interfere with my obligation to solve their problems. By noon, the email chain had devolved into pure panic. Sophia, I've been calling your phone all morning. I'm driving to your apartment. We need to talk. This is not just about your job, this is about our clients, our reputation, our entire business. Whatever you want, we can discuss it. Just please call me back. Linda. The progression was predictable, first denial, then anger, then bargaining. They were cycling through the stages of grief as they realized the scope of the disaster. But what they hadn't grasped yet was that this wasn't a technical failure requiring emergency repair, it was a complete system elimination requiring months of reconstruction. At 2:15 p.m., Linda sent what would be her final attempt at direct communication. Sophia, I'm sitting in your apartment parking lot. Your car isn't here and you're not answering your door. I don't know what you've done, but we can work this out. We're willing to discuss your compensation concerns. Please just call me so we can resolve this. The offer to discuss compensation concerns after 3 years of wage theft was almost insulting. They still didn't understand that this wasn't a negotiation or a cry for attention. This was consequences arriving precisely when they were most inconvenient. While Linda was stalking my empty apartment, I was 3 states away, finally joining my family's belated Christmas celebration. My phone sat powered off in my overnight bag, freed from its role as their digital leash. For the first time in years, I was present for family conversations, playing with my nieces, and enjoying the holiday traditions I'd sacrificed for their profit margins. But back in the office, the horror was just beginning to unfold. As the day progressed, the partners began to understand the true scope of the catastrophe. This wasn't just a database corruption that could be fixed with a backup restoration. The backups themselves were corrupted or missing. The offsite storage systems were inaccessible. The disaster recovery protocols led to dead ends. Patricia from HR joined the email chain with characteristic incompetence. I've contacted our IT insurance provider. They're asking for technical details about the system failure. Can someone explain what exactly happened? Also, they want to speak with our database administrator about recovery options. The irony was perfect. Their insurance provider wanted to speak with the very person whose resignation had created the emergency. The technical details they needed were locked in my head, documented in systems they couldn't access, or encrypted in files they didn't know existed. By 5 p.m., the email chain had attracted their attorney, their accountant, and an emergency IT consultant whose first question was, who has administrator access to rebuild these systems? The answer, of course, was sitting in my family's living room, playing board games with my 6-year-old niece and enjoying the Christmas dinner I'd missed for 3 consecutive years, but they wouldn't figure that out until much later. The emergency IT consultant's report landed in my email inbox 3 days later, forwarded by mistake in a reply-all chain that revealed the full scope of their digital catastrophe. Marcus Chen, no relation to Margaret, from Digital Recovery Solutions had spent 48 hours analyzing their systems, and his assessment was professionally devastating. Executive summary: Henderson and Associates has experienced complete data loss across all primary business systems. Initial analysis suggests cascading hardware failures affecting database integrity, backup systems, and disaster recovery protocols. Estimated recovery timeline, 6 to 8 months. Estimated cost, $750,000 to $1.2 million. Probability of full data recovery, less than 15%. The technical details were even more damaging. Marcus had quickly identified the sophisticated nature of the failures. noting inconsistencies that suggested deliberate deletion rather than hardware malfunction. But without my cooperation, he couldn't prove intentional sabotage, and the partners were reluctant to pursue that theory since it would implicate their own negligence. The database architecture shows signs of expert-level administration, Marcus wrote. Recovery efforts are complicated by the absence of proper administrative documentation and the departure of the primary database administrator. Current systems appear to have been managed by a single individual with comprehensive access privileges. Linda's response to the report was visible in the email chain: "This is impossible. We had backup systems. We had disaster recovery plans. Sophia assured us that our data was protected." Marcus's reply was clinically precise: the backup systems were disabled approximately 72 hours before the data loss incident. The disaster recovery plans reference procedures and access credentials that are no longer valid. Without the cooperation of your former administrator, implementing new systems will require rebuilding from scratch. But the technical challenges were only the beginning of their problems. The business impact assessment, attached as a separate document, painted a picture of complete operational collapse. Henderson and Associates had lost every client file, every financial record, every piece of institutional knowledge that existed in digital form. The client notification process had become a nightmare. How do you tell 2,000 clients that 15 years of their financial data has vanished? How do you explain that tax returns, investment strategies, and business planning documents no longer exist? How do you maintain professional credibility when you can't access basic account information? Margaret Chen's email from her hastily terminated cruise revealed the scope of client relations disasters. "We've lost the Morrison manufacturing account. They demanded immediate access to their Q4 financial analysis for a board meeting. When I couldn't provide it, they terminated our contract and demanded return of all documentation. Documentation we no longer have." David Morrison, no relation to Morrison Manufacturing, was dealing with similar defections from his Hawaiian office. 3 major clients have pulled their accounts since Monday. They don't understand how a professional firm can lose decades of financial data. Our reputation in the industry is destroyed. The financial projections were equally catastrophic. With no client data to reference, they couldn't generate bills for services rendered. Without historical records, they couldn't demonstrate the value of their ongoing management strategies. Without access to financial models, they couldn't provide the analysis that justified their premium fees. Patricia from HR had stumbled onto another crisis: "I can't access any employee records. Payroll information, benefits data, performance reviews, employment contracts, it's all gone. The payroll service is asking for documentation to process year-end tax forms. I don't know what to tell them." The legal implications were mounting daily. Several clients had hired attorneys to demand return of their financial documents. Regulatory agencies were asking for compliance reports that couldn't be generated. The IRS was requesting documentation for audits that depended on data that no longer existed, but the most damaging revelation came from their accountant's analysis of the situation. The data loss has created potential liability issues that extend beyond simple service disruption. If clients can demonstrate financial harm resulting from the loss of their records, Henderson and Associates could face significant damage claims. Current professional liability insurance may not cover losses resulting from data management negligence. Linda's desperate attempts to contact me had escalated to borderline harassment. In addition to the parking lot stalking incident, she had called my family members, contacted former colleagues, and even reached out to my college roommate. The messages grew increasingly unhinged as the business consequences became clear. "Sophia, I know you're getting these messages. Whatever we did wrong, we can fix it. Your salary, your working conditions, your treatment, everything is negotiable. But we need your help to recover this data. Our clients are depending on us. Our employees' jobs are at stake. Please don't let innocent people suffer because of problems between us." The manipulation was textbook, making my actions responsible for harming innocent people while avoiding any acknowledgement of their systematic exploitation. Even facing complete business collapse, she couldn't admit that wage theft and workplace abuse might have consequences. Marcus's follow-up report, sent directly to their attorney, was even more blunt. The sophistication of the data deletion suggests intimate knowledge of the system architecture. The timing, coinciding with the administrator's resignation, strongly suggests intentional action. However, proving deliberate sabotage would require forensic analysis that could cost more than system reconstruction. The attorney's response was telling: "Before pursuing any criminal allegations, we need to consider our own potential liability. If employment law violations contributed to this situation, criminal charges could backfire spectacularly. I recommend focusing on recovery rather than prosecution. By the end of the week, the full scope of the disaster was undeniable. Henderson and Associates had gone from a thriving financial services firm to a shell company with no data, no client relationships, and no operational capacity. The Aspen vacation that had cost $130,500 now seemed like a trivial expense compared to the millions in lost revenue and recovery costs, but the most beautiful irony was still unfolding. They needed me more than they had ever needed me before. Precisely when I was finally free from their exploitation, Linda appeared at my door on January 3 at 7:30 a.m., flanked by David Morrison and a man I didn't recognize wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. The legal demand letter had arrived by certified mail the previous day, but seeing her desperate face in person made the reality of their situation crystal clear. "Sophia, we need to talk," Linda said, her voice strained with barely controlled panic. "This is our attorney, James Whitfield. We have some serious concerns about the timing of the database failures." I stepped aside to let them enter, noting how David's usual arrogance had been replaced by nervous energy. He kept checking his phone, probably fielding calls from clients demanding explanations he couldn't provide. The attorney maintained professional composure, but his presence revealed how seriously they were taking the situation. "Coffee?" I offered, gesturing toward my kitchen. "I have plenty of time to talk now that I'm not working Christmas holidays." The subtle dig wasn't lost on Linda, whose jaw tightened visibly. "Sophia, we know you're upset about the working conditions, but this data loss is affecting innocent people. Our clients trusted us with their financial futures. Employees who had nothing to do with your complaints are facing unemployment. What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, settling into my favorite armchair while they remained standing awkwardly in my living room. The attorney spoke for the first time. "Ms. Williams, the timing of these system failures, coinciding precisely with your resignation, raises questions about potential sabotage. Deliberately destroying company data would constitute multiple felonies, including computer fraud and theft of trade secrets." I reached for the manila folder I'd prepared for this moment, extracting the legal demand letter they'd sent. "Before we discuss alleged sabotage, perhaps we should address the documented wage theft, labor law violations, and discriminatory practices outlined in my attorney's response." Linda's face went pale as I handed her a thick document packet. "Your attorney?" "Elizabeth Harrison from Morrison, Pierce and Associates. She specializes in employment law and has been reviewing my situation for several months. You'll find her analysis quite illuminating." David leaned over Linda's shoulder as she flipped through pages of legal analysis, financial calculations, and documented evidence. The color drained from his face as he recognized screenshots of his own emails discussing strategies to minimize my compensation. "The preliminary assessment," I continued conversationally, "suggests damages in excess of $400,000 for wage theft alone. That doesn't include penalties for discriminatory practices, retaliation, or the emotional distress caused by systematic workplace abuse." The attorney's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Ms. Williams, even if employment disputes exist, that doesn't justify criminal destruction of company property." "I haven't admitted to destroying anything," I replied calmly. "But I'm curious about your theory. Are you suggesting that demanding fair compensation for my labor somehow caused your systems to fail?" Linda's voice was desperate now. "Sophia, forget about the legal issues for a moment. We're willing to pay you whatever you think you're owed. We'll give you a raise, better working conditions, whatever you want. Just help us recover the data." "The data that you claim I destroyed?" "We didn't say you destroyed it," David interjected quickly. "We're just asking for your technical expertise to help with recovery efforts." I pulled out another document from my folder, Marcus Chen's preliminary assessment. "According to your own IT consultant, the probability of full data recovery is less than 15%. Even with my cooperation, rebuilding your systems would take months and cost over $1 million. "Money isn't the issue," Linda said, though her voice suggested otherwise. "We'll pay whatever it takes." "Really? Because 3 weeks ago, you claimed the company couldn't afford a $20,000 salary increase. Now you're talking about spending 50 times that amount on system recovery." The attorney tried to regain control of the conversation. "Ms. Williams, if you have information that could help recover critical business data, you have a legal obligation to provide it. Withholding that information could constitute obstruction of justice." I stood up and walked to my desk, returning with the encrypted USB drive containing my evidence files. This drive contains 3 years of documentation about Henderson and Associates' business practices. Financial records, email communications, recorded conversations, and detailed evidence of systematic labor law violations. Linda's hands were visibly shaking now. What kind of documentation? Everything. The overtime theft, the discriminatory comments, the financial mismanagement, the expense account fraud. Including the $130,500 Aspen vacation funded by stolen wages while forcing me to work Christmas Day. David's face went from pale to ashen. How did you? Those were private communications. Database administrators have access to email servers, David. I was performing routine maintenance when I discovered your discussions about minimizing labor costs. All perfectly legal under my administrative duties. The attorney was frantically taking notes. Ms. Williams, are you suggesting that you accessed private communications without authorization? I'm suggesting that employers who steal wages and violate labor laws shouldn't be surprised when their database administrator documents evidence during legitimate system maintenance. My attorney has confirmed that all evidence gathering was conducted within the scope of my authorized duties. Linda tried one last desperate appeal. Sophia, please. I know we made mistakes, but destroying the business won't just hurt us. Think about Sarah in client services, Jake in accounting, all the other employees who depend on their jobs. The same employees whose overtime you've been stealing for years? The ones who will now qualify for back wages when the Department of Labor investigates? I think they'll be fine. The attorney was clearly ready to leave. Ms. Williams, we'll be filing criminal charges related to the data destruction. Your employment complaints don't justify corporate sabotage. File away, I replied, walking them toward the door. But you might want to consult with your professional liability insurer first. When my wage theft lawsuit goes public, along with documentation of systemic labor law violations, your insurance company might have questions about coverage for damages resulting from management negligence. As they reached the door, Linda turned back one final time. This isn't over, Sophia. We built that company. We won't let you destroy it. Linda, I said softly, you destroyed it the moment you decided that stealing my wages was an acceptable business practice. I just made the consequences visible. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment, reviewing the legal documents Elizabeth Harrison had prepared. The employment lawsuit would proceed regardless of their criminal allegations. The Department of Labor investigation would expose their systematic wage theft. The evidence on my encrypted drive would protect me from any serious prosecution while ensuring they faced consequences for years of exploitation, but the most satisfying part was knowing that they finally understood the true value of my expertise, precisely when it was no longer available to them. The Department of Labor investigation began on January 15, triggered by my formal complaint documenting 3 years of systematic wage theft and labor law violations. Agent Sarah Martinez arrived at Henderson and Associates with a team of investigators, armed with subpoenas for financial records, employee files, and computer systems that no longer contained accessible data. Elizabeth Harrison's strategy was methodical and devastating. Rather than waiting for Henderson and Associates to pursue criminal charges, we had gone on the offensive with multiple regulatory complaints, civil lawsuits, and media exposure that transformed me from potential defendant into whistleblower victim. The local business journal picked up the story first. Tech worker claims massive wage theft at prominent accounting firm. The article detailed my allegations without mentioning the database deletion, focusing instead on documented evidence of systematic overtime violations and discriminatory practices. Sophia Williams, a computer science graduate who served as lead database administrator for Henderson and Associates, claims the firm owes her over $400,000 in stolen wages and damages, the reporter wrote. Documentation provided to investigators includes time-tracking records, email communications, and recordings that allegedly show a pattern of labor law violations spanning multiple years. Linda's response to the media attention was predictably tone-deaf. Ms. Williams was a valued employee who unfortunately misunderstood the nature of her exempt status. We categorically deny any intentional wrongdoing and are confident that our employment practices will be vindicated. But the investigation quickly revealed that my misunderstanding was shared by employment law experts, Department of Labor analysts, and the 3 attorneys who had reviewed my case. The federal overtime exemption for computer professionals requires specific salary thresholds and job duties that Henderson and Associates had failed to meet. Agent Martinez's preliminary findings, leaked to the press within a week, were damning. Initial review suggests systematic misclassification of employee status, deliberate underreporting of work hours, and potential retaliation against workers who questioned compensation practices. The investigation expanded beyond my individual case when other employees came forward with similar complaints. Jake from accounting revealed that his overtime hours had been consistently underreported. Sarah from client services provided documentation of unpaid weekend work. Even Patricia from HR admitted that her own timesheet discrepancies had been dismissed by management. The criminal investigation into the database deletion proceeded simultaneously, but with considerably less momentum. The FBI's cybercrime unit assigned Agent Tom Richardson to the case, but his initial assessment echoed Marcus Chen's technical analysis, proving intentional sabotage would be extremely difficult without cooperation from the primary suspect. The deletion pattern is consistent with either sophisticated sabotage or cascading system failures, Agent Richardson explained to the prosecutor. The defendant clearly had the technical expertise and access privileges to delete the data, but we'd need to prove intent beyond reasonable doubt. The prosecutor's enthusiasm cooled significantly when Elizabeth Harrison filed our motion for discovery in the employment lawsuit. If the government pursued criminal charges, we could subpoena internal communications about my working conditions, compensation decisions, and any discussions of retaliation against employees who complained about labor practices. Your Honor, Elizabeth argued during the discovery hearing, if the prosecution claims that employment disputes motivated alleged criminal activity, then the nature and extent of those employment disputes become central to both cases. The defense has a right to examine all evidence of systematic workplace abuse that might explain or justify any alleged actions. Judge Patricia Wong agreed, ruling that criminal prosecution would open all employment practices to scrutiny. The court finds that the circumstances of Ms. Williams' employment are directly relevant to any criminal charges related to the timing of her resignation and subsequent system failures. Henderson and Associates faced a devastating choice: pursue criminal charges and expose their labor law violations to criminal court scrutiny, or focus on civil litigation while accepting that the database deletion would remain officially unexplained. Their insurance company made the decision for them. Professional liability coverage explicitly excluded claims arising from criminal acts by employees, but it did cover damages resulting from employment practices violations. Pursuing criminal charges would void their insurance protection for the multi-million-dollar civil lawsuits that were already mounting. The client lawsuits began in February, led by Morrison Manufacturing's $2.3 million claim for damages resulting from lost financial records. Henderson and Associates was entrusted with 15 years of critical business data, their attorney argued. The loss of that data, regardless of cause, represents professional negligence that has caused substantial harm to our client's operations. Margaret Chen's attempt to blame the data loss on my alleged sabotage backfired spectacularly during her deposition. Elizabeth Harrison's cross-examination revealed the Aspen vacation expenses, the systematic wage theft, and the complete absence of proper data backup procedures. So you're claiming that Ms. Williams maliciously destroyed data? Elizabeth asked. But you also admit that the company had no qualified IT staff to prevent such destruction, no adequate backup systems to recover from failures, and no proper security protocols to limit administrator access? Margaret's answer exposed their fundamental negligence. We trusted Sophia to protect our systems. We didn't think we needed to protect the systems from Sophia. The media coverage intensified as more details emerged from depositions and regulatory filings. The state attorney general announced a broader investigation into wage theft practices at professional services firms. The local television news ran a series on tech worker exploitation, featuring my case as a prominent example. My personal transformation from database administrator to labor rights advocate was complete when the National Employment Law Association invited me to speak at their annual conference. The presentation, titled David vs. Goliath: How Documentation and Strategic Planning Can Defeat Workplace Exploitation, drew standing ovations from attorneys who specialized in exactly these types of cases, but the most satisfying development came from unexpected sources. Marcus Chen, the IT consultant hired to assess their data recovery, reached out privately to offer me a position with his firm. Your system architecture was brilliant, he wrote. We could use someone with your technical skills and attention to detail. 3 other IT consulting firms extended similar offers after reviewing my work during their own recovery assessments. The industry recognition that Henderson and Associates had denied me for 3 years suddenly appeared from competitors who understood the value of my expertise. By March, the legal battles had settled into a war of attrition that Henderson and Associates couldn't win. The employment lawsuit was supported by documented evidence, multiple corroborating witnesses, and regulatory findings. The client lawsuits were mounting into tens of millions in potential damages. The criminal investigation had stalled due to prosecutorial reluctance and evidentiary challenges, but the business consequences were already irreversible. Henderson and Associates had lost 70% of their client base, faced regulatory sanctions that would limit their professional licensing, and confronted legal costs that exceeded their annual revenue. The final blow came when their professional liability insurer announced non-renewal of coverage, citing systemic management failures that created unacceptable risk exposure. Without insurance, without clients, and without the technical infrastructure I had built and destroyed, Henderson and Associates was functionally finished as a viable business. The settlement negotiations took place in a sterile conference room at Elizabeth Harrison's law firm on April 12, exactly 4 months after my Christmas Day decision that had started this avalanche of consequences. Linda sat across from me looking 10 years older, her usual corporate confidence replaced by the hollow exhaustion of someone watching their life's work crumble. The total exposure exceeds $12 million, Elizabeth announced, spreading documents across the mahogany table. Employment law violations, client damage claims, regulatory fines, and ongoing legal costs. Henderson and Associates simply cannot survive this level of financial liability. James Whitfield, their attorney, looked defeated as he reviewed the settlement proposal. My clients are prepared to admit no wrongdoing but agree to the compensation terms outlined in your proposal. The irony was delicious. They were willing to pay me $847,000 in back wages, penalties, and damages while still claiming they had done nothing wrong. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain that position would have been impressive if it weren't so pathetic. Linda finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophia, I want you to know that we never intended for things to go this far. We thought we were running a successful business. You were running a successful business, I replied calmly. You were just doing it by stealing from your employees and exploiting people who trusted you. The success was built on my unpaid labor and systematic violation of basic workplace rights. David Morrison hadn't spoken during the entire negotiation. He sat slumped in his chair, occasionally glancing at his phone to check the latest client cancellation or media report. The Hawaiian vacation that had seemed so important in December now felt like a lifetime ago. The settlement terms were comprehensive and punitive. In addition to my financial compensation, Henderson and Associates agreed to pay back wages to every employee who had experienced timesheet discrepancies over the past 5 years. They would fund a labor law compliance audit conducted by independent experts. They would provide written apologies to affected employees and clients. Most importantly, Linda would be permanently banned from serving in any executive capacity at CPA firms licensed in our state. Her professional certification would be suspended, pending completion of ethics training and community service focused on labor rights education. The Department of Labor has agreed to close their investigation upon completion of these terms, Elizabeth continued. Criminal charges related to the database incident will not be pursued, though the FBI investigation remains technically open. That last detail was particularly satisfying. They could never definitively prove I had deleted their data, but they also could never definitively prove I hadn't. The uncertainty would follow them forever, a digital sword of Damocles hanging over any future business ventures. The actual signing took less than 10 minutes. 3 years of exploitation, months of legal warfare, and millions of dollars in damages reduced to signatures on settlement documents. But as Linda signed her name with a trembling hand, I could see that she finally understood the true cost of treating employees as disposable resources. There's one more thing, I said as they prepared to leave. I pulled out a flash drive containing the database architecture documentation they would need to rebuild their systems. This contains the technical specifications for your infrastructure. Consider it a professional courtesy. Linda looked confused. I don't understand. Why would you help us after everything that's happened? I'm not helping you, I replied. I'm helping the junior employees who still work there. Sarah, Jake, and the others deserve to have functional systems while they look for new jobs. This documentation will make the transition easier for whoever replaces your firm's services. The truth was more complex than I admitted. Providing the documentation served my own interests as well. It demonstrated good faith that would protect me from any future legal challenges while ensuring that my former colleagues wouldn't suffer unnecessarily during the business dissolution. After they left, Elizabeth and I sat in the conference room, reviewing the settlement terms one final time. You know, she said, in 20 years of employment law practice, I've never seen a case with this level of systematic documentation. Most workers don't realize they're being exploited until it's too late to build a proper case. I started documenting everything after the first year of overtime theft, I explained. I thought if I could prove the violations, they would fix the problems voluntarily. I never imagined it would end with their entire business collapsing. Employers like Henderson and Associates rely on worker compliance and ignorance, Elizabeth replied. They assume that young professionals will accept exploitation as normal, that fear of unemployment will prevent complaints, and that individual workers lack the resources to fight back effectively. The settlement check would arrive within 30 days, officially closing the most expensive lesson in labor law that any accounting firm had ever received. But the real victory wasn't financial, it was the transformation from victim to advocate, from exploited worker to empowered professional. That evening, I called my family to share the news. My parents had watched the legal battle unfold with mixture of pride and concern, worried about the stress but supportive of my decision to fight back against workplace abuse. "We're proud of you for standing up for yourself," my father said during our video call. "But are you okay? This whole situation must have been incredibly difficult." "It was difficult," I admitted. "But it was also necessary." Linda and her partners spent years convincing me that their exploitation was normal, that I should be grateful for the opportunity to work unpaid overtime. Breaking free from that mindset required proving to myself that my skills and labor have real value. My niece Emma, now 7, appeared on the video call wearing a t-shirt that read, "My aunt is a computer genius." The shirt was a Christmas gift from my sister, acknowledging the technical expertise that Henderson and Associates had taken for granted. "Aunt Sophie," Emma asked with the directness that only children possess, "are you going to work Christmas again next year?" "No, sweetie," I replied, smiling at the question that had started this entire journey. "I'm never working Christmas again unless I choose to. And if I do choose to work, I'll be paid fairly for every hour." The settlement was more than just financial compensation, it was validation that worker rights matter, that documentation can defeat exploitation, and that sometimes the best response to systematic abuse is strategic, methodical, and absolutely devastating consequences. The job offer from Meridian Technology Solutions arrived on May 1st, exactly 1 year after I should have received my promised salary increase from Henderson and Associates. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on me as I reviewed the compensation package that valued my expertise at nearly triple my previous salary. "We're prepared to offer $165,000 annually, plus performance bonuses, comprehensive benefits, and equity participation," Marcus Chin explained during our video interview. "Your work at Henderson and Associates demonstrated exactly the kind of technical leadership and system architecture skills we need. The same skills that Linda had dismissed as not exactly Google material were now being courted by multiple firms who understood their market value." In the 5 months since my legal victory, I had received offers from 7 different companies, each recognizing the expertise that my former employer had systematically undervalued, but Meridian's offer was particularly appealing because of their commitment to work-life balance and employee rights. "We have strict policies against overtime exploitation," Marcus continued. "Any work beyond 40 hours per week is voluntary and compensated at time-and-a-half rates. We believe that rested, fairly compensated employees produce better work than burned out, exploited ones." The contrast with Henderson and Associates couldn't have been more stark. Instead of manipulation and guilt trips about essential personnel, Meridian offered transparent policies and genuine respect for employee boundaries. Instead of budget excuses and empty promises, they provided detailed compensation packages and clear advancement opportunities. My first day at Meridian was a revelation in professional treatment. The onboarding process included comprehensive benefits orientation, ergonomic workspace setup, and introduction to colleagues who genuinely welcomed new team members. No one expected me to work through lunch, stay late without compensation, or sacrifice personal time for manufactured urgencies. The technical challenges were stimulating rather than overwhelming. Meridian's clients appreciated sophisticated database solutions and were willing to invest in proper infrastructure. Instead of fighting for basic resources and adequate equipment, I was encouraged to recommend optimal solutions without artificial budget constraints, but the most satisfying aspect of my new position was the professional recognition. Within 3 months, I was promoted to senior database architect, leading a team of 4 junior developers who treated my expertise with genuine respect rather than entitled expectation. The Henderson and Associates dissolution had become a cautionary tale throughout the local business community. The firm officially closed in June, unable to recover from client defections, regulatory sanctions, and legal costs that exceeded their total assets. Linda's professional reputation was so damaged that she relocated to another state, reportedly working in retail while attempting to rebuild her career. David Morrison had fared slightly better, joining a large firm as a junior associate, essentially starting over at age 45 with supervision and limited client contact. The career trajectory that had once seemed secure was permanently altered by his association with systematic wage theft and business mismanagement. Margaret Chen's cruise ship dreams were replaced by bankruptcy proceedings and professional ethics violations that would follow her for years. The luxury lifestyle funded by employee exploitation had collapsed along with the business model that sustained it, but the broader impact extended beyond individual consequences. The Department of Labor used our case as precedent for enhanced oversight of professional services firms. New regulations required detailed documentation of employee classification decisions and regular audits of overtime practices. The local business journal published a follow-up article 6 months after the settlement, The Henderson and Associates Collapse, a case study in employee relations gone wrong. The piece detailed how systematic exploitation of a single key employee had resulted in business destruction, regulatory intervention, and millions in damages. The case demonstrates that wage theft and workplace abuse aren't just moral failures, the reporter wrote. They're business risks that can destroy companies when employees have the knowledge, documentation, and determination to fight back effectively. My transformation from victim to advocate had attracted attention from labor rights organizations across the region. The National Employment Law Association invited me to serve on their Technology Worker Rights Committee. The local union representing IT professionals asked me to speak at their annual conference about documentation strategies for combating workplace exploitation. The most meaningful recognition came from unexpected sources. Sarah from Client Services, now working at a company that respected her contributions, sent a thank you note crediting my legal action with inspiring her to demand fair treatment in her new position. Jake from accounting had leveraged his settlement money to complete his CPA certification and start his own practice with proper employee protections built into the business model. Even Patricia from HR had found redemption, taking a position with a nonprofit organization focused on workplace rights education. Her first-hand experience with employment law violations had transformed her from passive enabler into active advocate for proper HR practices. The personal healing was more gradual but equally significant. The anxiety that had defined my final year at Henderson and Associates slowly faded as I experienced what normal professional relationships actually felt like. No more emergency calls during family dinners. No more guilt trips about taking vacation days. No more manipulation disguised as professional development. Christmas 2025 was everything the previous 3 had not been. I spent 5 days with my family, completely disconnected from work obligations, enjoying traditions I had sacrificed for employers who never appreciated the cost. Emma, now 8, made me a card that read, "To the best aunt who doesn't have to work on Christmas anymore." The financial settlement had provided security, but the real victory was psychological. I had learned that accepting exploitation isn't professional dedication, it's enabling abuse that ultimately harms everyone involved. Fair compensation isn't an unreasonable demand, it's a basic requirement for sustainable business relationships. Most importantly, I had discovered that technical expertise combined with strategic documentation could overcome institutional power imbalances. Individual workers weren't helpless against systematic exploitation if they understood their rights, documented violations, and pursued justice through appropriate channels. The skills that made me valuable as a database administrator, attention to detail, systematic analysis, comprehensive documentation, had also made me effective as an advocate for workplace rights. The same methodical approach that built robust database systems had built an unassailable legal case against employment abuse. 1 year later, I sit in my home office on Christmas morning 2025, not because I'm required to work, but because I'm choosing to write this story. The difference between obligation and choice defines everything that's changed since that December day when I decided that enough was enough. The journal entry I'm writing serves as both personal reflection and professional documentation of a journey from exploitation to empowerment. The experience taught me lessons about workplace rights, personal boundaries, and the power of strategic planning that extend far beyond database administration. The most important realization was recognizing that my technical skills were never the problem. Linda's constant undermining had convinced me that I wasn't Google material, that my expertise was somehow inferior to industry standards. But the job offers, professional recognition, and career advancement I've experienced since leaving Henderson and Associates proved that assessment was manipulation designed to justify exploitation. Young professionals, especially women in technical fields, are particularly vulnerable to this type of psychological manipulation. Employers use imposter syndrome and professional insecurity to convince capable workers that exploitation is normal, that demanding fair compensation is unreasonable, and that accepting abuse demonstrates dedication. The documentation strategy that ultimately protected me started as simple record keeping but evolved into comprehensive evidence collection that made legal victory inevitable. Every screenshot, every email, every recorded conversation became a thread in a web of accountability that my former employers couldn't escape. But documentation alone wasn't sufficient. Understanding employment law, consulting with attorneys, and building relationships with regulatory agencies provided the framework for transforming evidence into action. Individual complaints can be dismissed or ignored, but systematic violations documented over years create liability that companies cannot avoid. The decision to delete their database was the most controversial aspect of my response, and I understand why some people view it as extreme. But after 3 years of systematic wage theft, after watching them fund luxury vacations with my stolen labor, after being forced to work Christmas while they celebrated with my money, conventional responses felt inadequate. The legal system would have taken years to provide remedies, assuming I could afford prolonged litigation. Regulatory agencies might have imposed fines that were treated as business expenses. Internal complaints had already been dismissed through HR manipulation. The database deletion created immediate consequences that matched the scale of their exploitation. Critics argue that my actions harmed innocent employees and clients who had no involvement in management decisions. This concern is valid, and I don't minimize the disruption caused by the business collapse. But those same innocent people were already being harmed by systematic wage theft, discriminatory practices, and financial mismanagement that would have eventually destroyed the company anyway. The difference was timing and control. Management's exploitation would have continued indefinitely, gradually harming more employees and clients while enriching partners who prioritized personal wealth over business sustainability. My intervention accelerated consequences that were already inevitable while creating legal precedents that protected future workers. The broader impact extends beyond individual justice to systematic change. The Henderson and Associates case influenced regulatory oversight, inspired legal reforms, and demonstrated that employee exploitation carries business risks that can destroy companies. Other firms in our region revised their employment practices specifically to avoid similar consequences. Employment law organizations now use our case as a training example for workers facing similar exploitation. The documentation strategies, legal tactics, and regulatory approaches that secured my victory have been replicated in dozens of subsequent cases. The precedent transformed individual suffering into collective empowerment. On a personal level, the experience fundamentally changed my understanding of professional relationships and workplace rights. I learned that loyalty is earned through mutual respect, not demanded through manipulation. I discovered that technical expertise has market value that employers cannot arbitrarily define. I realized that individual workers have more power than they typically recognize. The financial settlement provided security, but the psychological transformation was more valuable. I no longer accept exploitation as normal or necessary. I don't sacrifice personal relationships for employers who view me as disposable equipment. I understand that work-life balance isn't a luxury, it's a requirement for sustainable professional relationships. My current position at Meridian Technology Solutions demonstrates what healthy employment relationships actually look like. Fair compensation, reasonable working hours, professional development opportunities, and genuine respect for employee contributions. The contrast with Henderson and Associates is so stark that I sometimes wonder how I tolerated the previous situation. For so long, the answer is systematic conditioning that normalized abuse through gradual escalation and psychological manipulation. Linda didn't start by demanding Christmas Day work or stealing overtime wages. She began with small boundary violations that expanded over time until exploitation felt routine. Breaking free required recognizing that incremental abuse was still abuse, that professional dedication didn't require personal sacrifice, and that my skills had value independent of employer recognition. The courage to act came from documentation that proved systematic violations and legal consultations that confirmed my rights. For workers facing similar situations, my advice is straightforward: document everything, understand your rights, consult with attorneys, and remember that individual compliance enables systematic abuse. Employers who violate labor laws depend on worker ignorance, fear, and isolation to continue exploitation, but systematic documentation, legal knowledge, and strategic planning can overcome institutional power imbalances. The same attention to detail that makes someone valuable as an employee can make them effective as an advocate for workplace rights. The Christmas morning when I made my decision was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The database administrator who had been exploited and undervalued became the advocate who secured justice and inspired change. The skills that built their systems ultimately brought them down, and the expertise they had taken for granted became the foundation for my professional transformation. This Christmas morning, surrounded by family photos and free from work obligations, I'm writing the final chapter of a story that began with exploitation and ended with empowerment. The journey was difficult, but the destination was worth every challenge along the way. Sometimes the best response to systematic abuse is strategic, methodical, and absolutely devastating consequences that create change extending far beyond individual justice.